my fellow Slivers across the multiverse. Welcome back to your one and only trustworthy Hive. First of all, I want to apologize. I've tried everything, but my computer doesn't seem to be able to capture MTG Arena gameplay using OBS Studio without the videos coming out laggy and choppy and just overall unwatchable. If you have any recommendations, please let me know in the comments below. However, I think I just need more RAM or a better video card, and right now I don't really have that much disposable income to invest in either. So yeah, again, I'm sorry my fellow Slivers. I promise you that I'm working really hard to get this channel going so I can offer more and better content. And you know how you can help me out. Just by subscribing, leaving a thumbs up or a comment, and sharing my videos with other Slivers across the multiverse. Now let's get to the main topic. Despite Arena crashing and costing me matches what felt like about 1,000,000 times, I managed to reach Mythic in constructed best of 1. And I wanted to share with you all the 2 decks that I played to reach that goal. Gruul Smash and Dimir Flash. Dimir Flash was like my substitute deck, coming out from the bench whenever I felt like I wasn't going to keep moving forward in that particular moment with Gruul Smash. So we'll start with the blue-black instant speed shenanigans. This deck is all about patience and sequencing and incremental advantages, so I promise you'll have a lot of fun with it. It operates on a very low mana curve, and it rarely needs more than 4 or 5 lands to eventually double and even triple spell each turn. You want a nice balance of threats and interaction. Just interaction or just threats won't cut it, so never play this deck thinking you can be full aggro or full control. We are more on the mid-range tempo side of Magic here. The main card for the deck is Brightburn Cutthroat, so of course we want 4 copies. It is our main threat, but we must play it carefully. The right moment is most of the time at the end of an opponent's turn, whenever they tap out. That way you can untap with it and have mana ready to protect it and or begin growing it on your opponent's next turn. Never play the Cutthroat if the other player has mana open for removal, unless you already have enough mana yourself to play the Cutthroat and protect it with Negate, which, believe it or not, is our main disruption spell in this deck. It protects our threats, sure, but it can do a lot more than that. It counters Planeswalkers, which are always problematic, especially 3 mana Teferi, which completely shuts down our whole strategy if he hits the board and survives a couple of turns. Negate can also deal with board wipes and stuff like Zenith Flare, Embercleave, Wilderness Reclamation, Shark Typhoon, Expansion Explosion, etc, etc, etc. So yeah, Negate might not be counterspell, but it's still great after all these years. Let's go over the rest of our creatures and pieces of interaction. As you can probably imagine already, they can all be played at instant speed. The only mythic rare we run is Brazen Borrower. This card is just amazing in this deck, so the 4 copies are a must. It keeps aggro decks at bay for the first couple of turns, it can remove a big blocker so we can swing for lethal, and it is actually quite good at beating down in the air. Our third best creature is Slitherwisp. I can't tell you how many games I won where I didn't have good attacks anymore, but I just played stuff with Flash on my own turn, and that was enough to get the other player to 0 life. Plus, it draws you more cards, which is something you always want. The rest of the creature lineup includes 4 copies of Spectral Sailor, an excellent turn 1 play or even mid-game high synergy Flash creature while the Cutthroat or Slitherwisp are on board. Plus, it's a great card draw engine in the late game. We also run 2 copies of Threnody Singer, which is a great combat trick against aggro decks, and 2 copies of Cunning Nightbonder, a creature that will allow us to play many of our threats for 1 less mana. Like I said, this deck is all about efficiency and incremental advantages, so the Nightbonder helps a lot with that game plan. Now let's move on to the non-creature spells and interaction. We run 4 copies of Omen of the Sea because wow, it's such a great card in this deck. It synergizes with the Cutthroat and Slitherwisp, it scries, it cantrips, it costs 1 blue with the Nightbonder in play, it adds Devotion for the Singer, it can get you the right card in a hurry, it does it all. When I started playing this deck, I used to run 4 copies of Heartless Act and 4 copies of Tyrant's Scorn as pieces of removal. Then M21 came out and it brought us Eliminate, which is just fantastic and versatile interaction. So I took out 2 copies of Tyrant's Scorn to add 2 copies of this new removal spell. You can always adjust the numbers depending on your own personal taste or even more importantly, the metagame. But I think the 8 pieces of removal have to be a combination of these 3 cards for maximized functionality of the deck. No murder, no 3 mana removal. Remember, efficiency is key to this strategy. The final piece of interaction is Essence Scatter. 2 copies are more than enough. We also run 2 copies of Opt for even more instant speed digging. The mana base is very simple. 4 copies of Watery Grave, 2 copies of Dismal Backwater, 2 copies of Fabled Passage, 8 islands, 6 swamps. You could run 2 copies of Temple of Deceit instead of Dismal Backwater, of course. It's just I didn't have that many rare wildcards, so yeah. However, don't you ever run more than 2 lands that enter the battlefield tapped. This is the final rule of this deck. Now let's get to the main event. The deck that won me the most games. Especially the last matches at Diamond Tier 1 before reaching Mythic, Gruul Smash. This deck is all about curving out and trying to always have a better board position than your opponent. Our creatures are not the biggest or the strongest out there, but they are flexible enough so that we can play aggro, mid-range or even grind out some games against certain decks. The interaction for this deck contains efficient removal and combat tricks. Again, not the best, most powerful removal or combat tricks ever, but in here they work. Now let's start with the creatures. I run 4 copies of Almighty Brushwagg as my 1-drop. Yeah, you heard correctly, Almighty Brushwagg. I like it better than Pelt Collector since the trample is already built in. And a lot of opponents ignore it the whole game until it's too late to remember that little mana sink it has. Believe me, the Brushwagg ended as many games as the only mythic rare in this deck, which is Questing Beast. It turns out turn 3 Questing Beast is still quite good and a lot of times really hard to beat. It forces control to board wipe as soon as possible, it kills annoying planeswalkers without having to attack them directly. Questing Beast is our best creature by far. How do we get it on the battlefield on turn 3? Well, we run 4 copies of Paradise Waifu. This card does much more than enabling turn 3 Questing Beast. It will allow us to double spell faster. For example, we run 4 copies of Bonecrusher Giant, 3 copies of Surta Goblin and 4 copies of Gruul Spellbreaker. If we have 4 mana by turn 3, we can play a Goblin and then stomp an opposing creature at instant speed before our next turn. If we have 5 mana by turn 4, we can stomp a creature and then play the Giant or play a Goblin and a Spellbreaker, etc, etc. That's the flexibility I was talking about. If we are playing against control or ramp, we need to kill them as fast as possible. So we can go face with the adventure part of the Giant or pressure life totals with our Riot creatures by choosing haste the turn they come down. If we are facing something like mono red or mono green, we might choose to go tall instead, making our creatures bigger and harder to remove. Our pieces of interaction include 4 copies of Shock, which is excellent against decks with small obnoxious creatures, but it can also go face to finish off the last points of damage, adding a little bit of reach to this deck. I used to run 4 copies of Lava Coil, but in the past couple of weeks, I switched to 2 copies of Lava Coil and 2 copies of Scorching Dragonfire, which can also hit planeswalkers. They are both excellent against Oven Kitty Cat and Reanimator decks. We also run 2 copies of Dimir's Ambush, a great piece of interaction to remove just as big or even bigger creatures than ours, and Planeswalkers too. 2 copies of Collision Colossus to trample past big blockers, deal with obnoxious flyers which Gruul generally hates, or make one of our creatures big enough to deal lethal damage. Last but not least, 2 copies of Heroic Intervention. They are obviously here to protect our creatures from board wipes, however, it's also great against other creature decks, as it will make their attacks a lot worse and our attacks a lot better. For the mana base, we run 4 copies of Stomping Ground, 2 copies of Fabled Passage, 1 copy of Temple of Abandon, 10 forests and 6 mountains. And that's it. These 2 decks, Dimir Flash and Gruul Smash, have no good matchups and they do have some bad ones. Dimir Flash struggles a little bit against Mono Red, especially on the draw. Gruul, as usual, struggles against flyers and decks with a million pieces of targeted removal or board wipes, such as Esper Control. However, even if there are no excellent matchups, if you learn these decks inside out, if you're mindful of the hands you keep, your sequencing, and the use of your removal and combat tricks, you will have a fighting chance against any deck from the current metagame. Plus, they are both really fun to play, which is, I think, a very undervalued asset for decks these days. Before the pandemic, I had been playing Teferi and Uro decks for months. That's why I didn't want to play the same on Arena. May this be a lesson for people who hate net decking. If I was able to beat dozens of Teferi and Uro decks using Almighty Brushwag and Slither Wisps, it's precisely because I know how those decks work and how they are usually built. So try to embrace both aspects of Magic: the net deck competitive side and the fun, janky homebrew side. Trust me, it will make you a far better, but more importantly, happier player. In the words of Patrick Chapin, if you're not at least 25% Bruce, you've got no heart. If you're not at least 25% net deck, you've got no brain. Take care, my fellow Slivers. We'll gather again on the next video.